What does it mean to baptize the imagination? What does Catholic storytelling really look like? All that and a lot more coming straight up. Don't go away. Greetings, Gracious Gang. It's Mike Creavey from thegraciousguest.org here with you for another episode of the Gracious Guest Show, where we try to become gracious guests in God's creation, to really appreciate the beauty that God is creating all around us in nature, to appreciate these moments of encounter with Him through all kinds of different means. Highest, most, of course, through the liturgy, through our direct sort of experience of Him in His divine revelation, but also through all these other sacramental means, if you think sacramental with a little s, maybe. We have opportunities through the movies we watch, through the books we read, through the art that we engage in, through conversation, just through our experience and relationships with each other, through food, through music. There's all kinds of ways where we can encounter Christ, who is the Logos, who makes all things cohere and make sense. So that's really kind of some things that we're all about here on this channel. If you have not subscribed, please do that. Make sure you click the little thumbs up there on this video if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening through the podcast somehow, wherever you're listening, please leave us a good rating or review on there. It really helps get the word out. Really appreciate it. I want to jump in now today to a really cool interview I just got to do recently with Avellina Balestri, and this is her bio I'm going to share. So Avellina is a Catholic author and editor based in Maryland, right on the Maryland-PA border, which Maryland, she points out, was the only English colony founded by Catholics. Her stories, poems, and essays have been featured in over 30 print and online publications. She has published 2 books, Saplings of Sherwood, which is the first book in a Robin Hood retelling series, and Pendragon's Shield, a collection of poetry. Avellina is the editor-in-chief of Fellowship and Fairydust, a magazine inspiring faith and creativity and exploring the arts through a spiritual lens. Under its auspices, she hosted a literary conference at Lady Margaret Hall in Oxford, England, commemorating the legacy of J.R.R. Tolkien. And so Avellina and I jump into a lot of different things. We talk about Marvel, we talk about, I think, Star Wars at one point in books. There's all kinds of cool things. But really, at the core of this conversation is a beautiful and I think an intriguing consideration of Catholic storytelling, of the richness of a sacramental worldview. And we do highlight a lot of what she has in the works right now, which is pretty cool. I myself am still working my way through the Robin Hood book, the Saplings of Sherwood volume, which is difficult to put down because it's just really, really, really well written. It is very engaging. The characters are extremely vivid. They're very real. And I'm really enjoying it. I highly recommend it. Please make sure you check out all the links below. And without further ado, here's my interview with Avellina Balestri. Check it out. Avellina Balestri, thank you so much for coming on the Gracious Guest Show.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, and this is my channel. We cover a lot of different things, faith and science. Don't get into apologetics specifically as much, but sometimes it'll be mysteries, Eucharistic um, uh, miracles and mysteries, the Shroud of Turin. There's all kinds of different topics. But then a recurring theme that I love to come back to is kind of all things Catholic imagination, and literature, sometimes
Mhm.
sci-fi, right? Trying to investigate some of these things. And I was really excited to a chance to talk to you here about this idea of Catholic storytelling, right? Sacramental storytelling, and just want to jump right in and see where you want to maybe start here on this and the importance of this, what this means to you.
Sure. Sure. Well, I mean, when we think about sacramental storytelling, oftentimes the first thing a lot of people think about is J.R.R. Tolkien, with regards to his understanding of subcreating and sacramental imagination. And it was the idea that since God is the creator of everything, he enables us to participate in that creative work through subcreation. And there's fragments of truth and, light and high beauty in the stories that we can tell. And we're, enabled to be kind of a conduit of grace through that, through the tales
Mm,
we tell. So I greatly, admire Tolkien's ability to grasp that and to convey that in the stories that he told, and the ability to take so many different elements and weave them together in a way that did convey his faith in a subtle way,
Mm.
in a way that was very underlying to the world he created, but which was sort of, you know, omnipresent, you know. And
Yeah.
when listening to Lord of the Rings, sometimes you're struck by it without even being able to pinpoint directly. Sometimes you can pinpoint better than other points, like that is definitely a Catholic inspired element. And other times it's not so clear, but you just feel it. It's almost as if there's this spiritual aura that's sort of permeating the entire
Yeah.
story, even though there's not any direct references to religion or God in this world. And in a way that works better to permeate it somehow with this mysterious providence that
Mm.
is absolutely a part of everything that unfolds. So in that sense, I take a lot of inspiration from that understanding of of storytelling, for a Christian, for a Catholic. And I think another element is that for a Christian, at the end of the day, we hinge upon a story, that is
Yeah.
very concrete in history. And I mean, I think it's fair to say, obviously, all the great religious traditions do to some extent have stories, of course, undergirding them. But I would say that Christianity has a much more immediate, tethering to a story that we believe happened in history, and which involves God breaking into history in an incarnate, you know,
Mm.
form. So obviously, again, with different religious traditions, there are stories of their prophets and sages and whatnot. But
Right.
God remains the storyteller, but I would say does not become a character within the drama, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
With us, it's both. It's both. He is the playwright and the main character within the drama.
Mm.
So I think that all Christian storytelling at the end of the day must reflect that one story upon
Mm.
which everything is tethered. Um, it's sort of like a cross section of reality, quite literally, is hinged upon the Triduum. I've always thought of that since I was a very young child. I've had an attraction, I guess you might say, and a kind of, I don't know. Again, it's sort of an attraction to the beautiful horror, in a
Mm.
sense, of the crucifixion, and, and then the eucatastrophe, to use another
Yeah.
term from Tolkien, of the resurrection. So it's the promise that all things that are wrong will be made right, and that, the willingness, I think, of Christianity more than any other religion to really go into the depths of the darkness in
Yeah.
a very, very profound way. Because again, even though there's, again, many religious traditions that will talk about how their, prophets and sages went through difficulties, tragedies, and trials. A, they're not God in the same, sense. Again, even in the religions that believe they're divine in some capacity, they're not, you know, the way that the Abrahamic understanding of God,
Right.
it. And second,
It's that transcendence and
secondly,
immanence at the same time.
it's exactly,
Yeah.
it's the transcendence and immanence simultaneously,
Yeah.
and also the fact that in many religions you do not get the story where the character goes, um fully to their death. Now, in some pagan mythology, you do certainly, but they are not typically in a salvific way. The closest thing you
Mm.
would get, is like in the Norse sagas and other, various pagan mythologies about a character who must die in order to be reborn or to learn something, or to, something like that must
Right.
happen, kind of the Odin plucking out of an eye thing,
Mm-hmm.
and him dying, Yggdrasil and all of that. But it's not really comparable to Christianity. I
Right, like
think it
it's not like
has.
asserted as
I
like a
think it does
historical
have.
event, you know, like
It's not assertive. No,
yeah.
it isn't, and it also even putting that to the side, even the story beats aren't the same. So in other words, it's like it's not involving really something about self-sacrificial love for you know the whole of humanity and a willingness to bear up the dysfunction of humanity. It's not even close. That's why
Hmm.
when some um, neo-pagan comment commentators on this sort of thing, they tend to like to conflate, and oh, Christianity just ripped off pagan myth, and it's like, well,
Right.
no. At best, I would say that there was a foretaste, and this is, I think, what Tolkien would say as well. There was foretastes of the Christian story within pagan myth, and beautiful
Hmm.
foretastes sometimes, but it's certainly not comparable. And so those are the closest things. But in many other religions, I'm
Right.
thinking of Islam mainly in my mind, um, you know, the figure of, you know, the prophet is very revered. So Muhammad, and the idea, of course, is they do believe he like struggled and suffered and so forth, loss
Hmm.
of family, um, and being, exiled from the city of Mecca by the pagan, elites and so forth. So and having his message rejected by various people and so on. But they always will sort of put the caveat: God restores him to everything, and he becomes the great you know leader of armies and an empire and so forth. And that is sort of the payoff. In other words, God will not allow himself through his messengers to be completely smitten.
Hmm.
There will be this very earthly redemption. And I feel like this is why, one of the reasons why, obviously it's complicated, but why Muslims rightly view the cross as a scandal, and it should be a scandal. I think sometimes Christians forget. We become so accustomed to it.
Hmm.
Muslims actually can remind us something, which is that it's a scandal and a stumbling block,
Right.
and it should be a
Paul
scandal.
talks about
It
that.
should, yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And I think we forget it because, in a way, we sanitize it.
Yeah.
We forget just what it is. And I think, you know, Muslims certainly have reminded me time and time again about what a horrible thing it is. And to them, oftentimes the response will be, well, God would never allow that to happen to one of his prophets, because they believe Jesus was a prophet,
Right.
he wasn't divine. But even on that level, even as a prophet, they think that's a step too far. Um, and that one of his top prophets too. They believe he was like one of the messengers, which is a little distinct from, they believe there was many prophets and there was messengers.
Hmm.
So suffice to say, they think it's just a step too far, and I would say we need to take that step too far. That's what Christianity does. That is what, in a sense, we exist to do.
Right.
We take the step too far, but it's not too far. It's too far for human beings, but it's not too far for God. And this is the whole element of Christianity. There's this cross section of the human and the divine in the person of Christ. And all stories, I think, from a truly Christian perspective, should shake things up a little bit.
Hmm.
They should leave us with a feeling of that cross section, and of things that are mysterious, that often cross over with things that are ordinary.
Right.
And I think actually another writer who did this very well was G.K. Chesterton in The Ballad of the White Horse, among his many other works. But Ballad of the
Yeah.
White Horse, I think, did a very good job, in my opinion, capturing the mystery and the paradox of Christianity, um, and what makes it unique. And it's really the ability to embrace that holy paradox of, God was a great servant, you know, and he was slain as a serf is slain.
Mm.
And it is, I think that all Christian storytelling should be able to capture that shock and awe, in a sense, that we're proclaiming some very radical things. We're a radical faith in that sense.
And I think too that there's a coherence of everything in it that, I'm trying to think how to say this. Well, let me give you an example. I've had my fair share of enjoyment in dabbling in the MCU over the last 15 years or so, like so many people. But I just, in the last couple years, and to each his or her own on opinions about Marvel movies, but it's just becoming, in my opinion, just incoherent and just inconsistent, and it's just so, it's like, based on which one you've watched. Like, I don't know if you've seen the Moon Knight series, but just for example, it's like, so like ancient Egyptian eschatology is true, but so is Greek mythology, and so is Norse mythology. And so, and you go down the list, like, so all of these different religions and
Yeah.
mythologies are all true in the MCU, but some of them are diametrically opposed to
I
each
feel
other. They
like,
make no sense. And it's just kind of like,
yeah,
it just, yeah, it's like something's missing, like it,
I feel
but
like you could
the gospel
only,
is so simple,
yeah,
you know, and so true, you know.
I feel like you could only make that work story wise with certain mythologies that can cross over better than
Right,
others. Like for example, the Greco-Roman tradition is obviously kind of a conflated tradition itself because you've got,
right.
the Romans basically adopting most of the Greek pantheon and stuff.
Hmm.
And they did do that in various places they conquered. So there is some way you can do that. But like so for example, I could see it kind of working out in like Celtic Britain, where you have the Romans conquer, and then you get a lot of gods and deities that are kind of the same with different names and stuff like
Hmm.
that because of the Roman influence on the Celtic Britain, the Celtic British pantheon, so to speak. So you get this like, but then there's other pantheons where yeah, no, it's just totally different. And I do think like there's like totally different religions going on, like in terms of like for example, African mythology is
Hmm.
very different from Greco-Roman mythology,
Right.
which is very
Yeah.
different from Norse mythology. And you can make some of that overlay, but trying to do it all, I think it just comes down to this with the MCU. They've gotten super politically correct.
Right.
Like that's kind of what it feels like. And so they're
Yeah.
trying to, yeah.
Compelling
Like
characters and
I don't know.
stories,
I
and
feel like yeah,
well,
like Black
actually,
Panther, I feel like
yeah.
Black Panther lacked. It had a good few ideas that I would have liked to see develop because I actually would quite like to see like different African folklore and different
Hmm.
African traditional religious beliefs explored. But I feel like they were trying too hard to make a particular social commentary
Hmm.
from a particular perspective. And also, I feel like the way that they set up Wakanda was pretty poor. Like you're
Hmm.
saying, this completely isolated place managed to like the whole civilization really like just thrives on its own, cut off from everyone else. That's not typically how it works.
Yeah.
And also like the whole notion yeah of Wakanda being able to do stuff and it's okay if they do it, but if other countries do it, it's not okay because
Yeah,
Wakanda
it was
is
a little
essentially set up
inconsistent.
to be a yeah,
Right.
it's set up to be a fantasy land in a sense. It's not reflecting. Well, first of all, it's also I think the problem with it is that it's kind of not even reflecting the complexity of Africa. This is a continent with so many different
Right.
cultures and peoples and so on.
Yeah.
It's not just one, like, it's almost like a perspective of what Africa fulfills. I'm not saying that's all bad necessarily. I mean, I think this is true of any group
Hmm.
that ends up feeling disenfranchised from their cultural roots. And obviously,
Hmm.
people, so I feel like it's people whose heritage they cannot trace because obviously their background something just moved strangely on my desk. Anyway, um it's things people obviously who's like here in America,
Hmm.
many Black people can't trace their lineage because
Right.
it was back to slavery. All their records are wiped out. They can't
Right.
trace. So it's very understandable why this is filling in the way it's filling in. And
Hmm.
I'm not dissing them for that really, but I am just saying that it does feel a bit fake. Like it doesn't
Mm.
actually feel like it's representing Africa as much as it's representing what various African Americans want Africa to be in their head in a fantasy. And I don't know. I think it could have been done better, quite
Hmm.
frankly, in a way that was more,
Yeah, I just yeah,
frankly, culturally sensitive, I even think, towards
I thought there was
actual
a lot more character
like
development
African
that could
culture.
have happened there, you know, and
Yeah.
well, and my wife and I were talking about just with
I
and
actually like the character. Yeah,
mhm.
I actually like the character of Black Panther. They just I feel like
Oh
they
yeah,
didn't do that much with him.
yeah.
That was the problem. It was like,
Well, and with a lot of the stuff too, because I really love the way they weaved him in, the way they weaved him into the main sort of storyline when they were doing the whole Avengers build up. I forget the phase numbers, whatever it was, phase three or whatever. Um, and then that to like through Infinity War. But see, my issue with and this isn't specifically a Marvel podcast, but there's the reason I'm bringing this some of this up too is I think that and I want to dovetail this into maybe not now but later into some questions I have about your book, or the one that I've been able to get through the most so far. But it's the question of stakes. And this is something like we were talking about Star Wars a little bit before too. One of my biggest criticisms of the newer movies is, there's a lot of like kind of smoke and mirrors to build up to like, oh, these big stakes. And they did do that with those, like the Avengers arc. And it was really, really great, I thought, at
mhm,
least, but everything since,
mhm.
really, in my opinion, everything since Endgame just doesn't match the stakes of that. So it's just not that interesting to me in a lot
Yeah.
of ways.
And that's the
But and they
difficult.
try to do it with that same like, oh,
Yeah.
the stakes. And so that's what I felt about like a lot of the new Star Wars movies is, I said, especially about like the Rise of
Mhm.
Skywalker and stuff. We talked about this on the SQPN, the Secrets of Star Wars podcast. I brought this up a lot about, and I always say it this way. It's like, listen, it's not that I wanted Lando and Chewie to die in a blaze of glory in the Millennium Falcon. What I'm saying is, if that had happened,
Yeah.
or if any legacy character, had really faced some heroic death. I mean, like Han gets stabbed. That's heartbreaking. Luke does his thing and he
Yeah.
disappears. Leia dies, and there were all the issues with Carrie Fisher from the real life. And of course, I get that, but
Yeah.
it's just like when you get to the credits of Rise of Skywalker, it's like I don't really feel now looking back on it like the stakes were ever really that high in retrospect. And
I
so
feel like the sequel, yeah, the sequel trilogy was essentially fan fiction. Like that's
that's what
what
it
it
felt
felt
like.
like. It was fan fiction. It was a fan fiction sequel. And I mean, look, I enjoyed watching them as
Oh yeah,
popcorn films.
I always
If
do.
you're
Yeah.
watching like fan fiction popcorn films, fine. But
And I've
yeah,
I've never I've never watched anything Star Wars and come away from it at the end going, I wish I had done something else. I love to watch it. Like
yeah, but I totally agree with you. It felt like they were making it up on the go.
yeah.
Like honestly, the people were writing this thing, and then they just were like, "Oh, what
I
do
think
the
they've admitted as
fans
much.
actually want?" And they were like, "Oh, Ray, your parents were just garbage collectors on this planet. Oh, the fans don't like that.
Just
Okay,
kidding.
let's bring back Palpatine." And it's like,
That
what?
was
Yeah,
well, and the reason I bring all this up is to dovetail here into and we can expand here more because the in getting in touch with you here, I unfortunately just I can't read anything as fast as I used to with the little ones. I read like 5, 6
no
pages at a
worries.
time. So I at the speed I normally read at nowadays, I will tell you that I have been really devouring it. So I would if
Oh,
five
I'm
five
pleased to
six
hear
years
that.
ago, I probably would have been done with it by now. But I'm right about the halfway point in the Telling of the Beads,
Did you
Volume
make it to the
One.
duel?
To the what's that?
Did you make it to the duel? Did you make it to the duel yet?
No, almost. That's that's I'm getting
Okay,
close.
you're right up to the okay.
And that's so I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but
I was
can
actually there last night.
but this I just want to kind
Yeah,
of
go
invite you
ahead.
here to share a little bit about this particular book and what your goal is with it, and maybe within that, just I wanted to ask you so much about it, but maybe in the broader question about um your research and with your character development, to the extent that we have time to go into all that, how do you attempt, as a writer, to get in these characters, inhabit these characters, however that works for you, to try to
Yeah.
make them believable.
All right, so maybe a good way to segue into that would be to do some reader comprehension testing on your part, and maybe describe your general impression of the book so far and the
Hmm.
basic storyline.
Yeah, a far too simplistic maybe way of describing it, what comes to me is kind of like Robin Hood's origin story, you know, is kind of
There we
how I see it in
go.
some ways. So, but sometimes that gets a cheesy kind of connotation, or it can be kind of a trope. I'm really enjoying the idea. And I didn't know that going in. I didn't know what I was. I just knew it was a Robin Hood book. I didn't, have any
Right.
backstory to it. So a couple things that have jumped out at me that I really like, um, just I find really intriguing, sort of stylistically. If I'm allowed to share this, I'm not going to give too many plot points
Go
away or
ahead.
anything like that. But I like that how many, if not all, of the chapters. I didn't go back and double check them all, but this recurring format of the chapter beginning with Robin or whichever character it is, remembered, so and so remembered, and what I love about that is you get the sense there's this richness as it's going on, that these are important things that this person is remembering. Well, I mean, because it says that, of course, but
I'm
like I'm
so
finding
glad.
myself I'm finding myself wondering, like, why is he remembering that? Because it to me it's neat because it automatically makes me invest in the chapter, because like if someone's writing a book like this about my life, I know it's not going to be Mike remembered, and you turn the page and it's like, and it builds up to like that SpaghettiOs can that he opened last Thursday. Like, no, it's like it's going to be something. Might not be a tragic, it might be a happy memory, it might be tragic, but like the nature of memory, how none of us really remembers things, I think, as well as we think we do sometimes. You know,
It
like
passes
some
into a mythic sphere
Right,
in a
right. Because
sense.
because maybe like objectively, maybe high school wasn't as bad as I remember it, or maybe it wasn't as good as I have turned it into in my head. Like we were all best friends. No, no, we weren't. Like, you know. But whatever that moment in life is, I think that's something about that's just something I wanted to mention to you. I think that's a really powerful and unique, kind of way to do that. And I don't think I've seen that quite that way before. But we pick up,
I
with
am genuinely
oh
so
yeah, go ahead.
pleased. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I am genuinely so pleased that you said that. It's one of the best compliments I could get. And the reason is I had to fight tooth and nail with my editors
Oh,
to
did
keep
you?
that. I had at least five, yes, I had
You're
at
welcome.
least five
No.
editors say, this is weird. Why are you doing that? It's throwing. Like it's just why do you keep opening each chapter with so and so remembers? And I said,
Oh my
I like it.
gosh.
I just like it. I want to do it.
There's
And so I
confirmation
had to
for you.
fight them, and
Oh,
I don't want to get rid of it. I want to keep that. I think it's cool. I think it has this mythic quality to it, and I just, yeah.
did
Uh,
you ever hear that
and so that
this is just it's sort of related but not exactly. I just think you might find this funny as an Anglophile. I heard an interview with Paul McCartney where he said, I guess his dad was a musician as well, and when they were trying to hash out "She Loves You," his dad was like adamant that it should be "She loves you, yes, yes, yes." And I just can't help but like I've talked to my dad, my uncle, we've talked about this and laughed. Like, can you imagine like if that classic song was, it wouldn't have, it needs to be, yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know why. It just needs to be that,
yeah,
if there's destiny. But speaking of destiny, it's so amazing because, and to be fair, I've never read, I don't think, any. I've always been, I think, interested in the background in Robin Hood, but it's never been something I've really pursued, like the mythos. I listened to one of the links I have below is your great interview with Kyle, which just kind of probably goes in more depth than we have time for here. But you talk about the
yeah,
how
Kyle
wide
was
that
lovely.
legendarium is, right? That there's so many historical
Mm.
sources and legends and all this stuff pieced together, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit. But just one last thing here before I jump into that. I've never, beyond like beyond the Disney one, which I know you talk about, um, and
First one for me, yeah.
the well, and this might, I don't know how people, or yourself included, will feel about this. I have fond childhood memories of the Kevin Costner one, which I know there's.
I thought you were going to say Kevin Costner.
So, and I'm not talking at, I have no comment about like his accent, about like the historical, none of it. It's just I as a young, kid, even like there were certain things about that captivated, for me at least, things about like, honor and commitment and
Mhm.
heroism and all these kinds. It's just, I thought it was a good movie per se. As far as its take on Robin Hood, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the only other one I ever saw was the Russell Crowe one that came out like 10, 12 years ago, which I was kind of on the
Why
fence
do
about.
we keep casting Russell Crowe? Like,
Yeah, like,
tell me why they keep
well, that's
casting Russell Crowe in things. I don't
just pick,
understand.
yeah,
Like,
pick somebody else.
he
Yeah, no.
made a great Lucky Jack. It's like he made a great Maximus and a great Lucky Jack Aubrey. And ever
Yeah.
since that time, he's just being cast in these weird things. They're making
Yeah.
him sing. They're
Hmm.
making him sing in Les Miserables. They're
I got,
having him be Noah and Robin Hood.
I
Why are
know.
they doing this? I
I got a
don't
kick. I did
understand.
get a kick out of his portrayal of Zeus though in the most recent Thor movie, which was kind of trashy, but whatever.
Okay.
No, but so that, just to say, like, I don't have any literary background on it, and so I don't know. Like, I wanted to ask you about your research here in this. As you piece together this, as I said, this origin story, which again I don't know how far we're going here with it. Of course, in this particular volume, so I'm excited to find out. And all the influences, the setting that I mean, it's so rich the way you really kind of build this up. I can really sense a real, like, you didn't just throw this together. Like, I can tell there's a lot of research behind this. How did you start to kind of frame this in your mind and kind of get this idea of where you wanted to go with it in a particular way?
Well, I mean, it took about 5 years to produce. So, and I have been writing like in the course of those 5 years, other parts of the series because it is
Right.
the first book in a multi-book series. So yeah, it was one of those things that did, I wanted to take the whole thing very seriously and ground it historically. And now obviously there's no way, as I mentioned in Kyle's show,
Hmm.
of doing it all when it comes to
Right.
Robin Hood. You can't because the Robin Hood legends span so far. You've got material that is included in there in what we now have as the legendarium, which ranges all the way to pre-Christian mythic elements
Mm. Mm.
to these figures like Hereward the Wake during the Norman conquest to the Third Crusade era when, Prince John was trying to usurp the throne from Richard while he was off at war and then was in need of ransom.
Hmm.
And then you've got elements, of course, after that, they're set more in the 13th century, that are actually when the first like ballads that were written down were set. And
Hmm.
they're basically talking about the reign of Edward Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots. So if you
Right.
watch Braveheart,
Right. And
I
that's
don't know
early. I
Braveheart
think
at all, but
that's
I have to reference it.
and that's like early 14th
So
century, I think, if I remember correctly at that point.
yeah, at that point it would be. And so I believe it just includes almost every era that you basically have. It was, oh, okay, I think I know where the crossover point would be though,
Hmm.
because you have in Edward Longshanks being referenced also as a prince. So this was around the same time of that was another whole reference point of the reign of Henry III. You
Hmm.
basically have the whole um, barons uprising and so on and so forth with Simon de Montfort. And so you have various nobles who wind up in exile as rebels, and you have Edward Longshanks being involved in that as the prince, the son of Henry III, who's crushing these rebels. So that's
Mm.
another element, and that's more 13th century, I believe. And then you
Hmm.
get into 14th century as you start leaning in gradually towards the Edwards, the first, the
Yeah.
second, the third, the Hundred Years' War era. And there is even a ballad that sets Robin, and this I think is the latest he's ever been set historically,
Hmm.
in the reign of Henry V.
Mm,
So this
really
would have been
interesting.
well into the Hundred Years' War era.
And the
Of
already existing corpus of tales of him
oh yeah,
at that
oh
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Huh.
and it's just one of those. So there's no way, and I mean I knew this when I took it up. I'm like, there's no way to make this strictly historically accurate in that sense without
Yeah.
you got to bend the rules somewhere to even do justice to the story as we remember it. Like back to the
Yeah.
memory thing.
Right.
So it's never
Exactly.
going to, yeah. So it was a tension between wanting to create a historically grounded version, but also realizing you can never be too strict with that because it's just impossible to even do justice to the material we
Right.
have.
Well, and a lot
So I
like
tried,
Arthurian
yeah.
legend is at that point too,
Oh
where
God,
you have
oh, that's
that's a whole
even
other thing. Right. Yeah. So
a whole
we'll
other
have
thing.
we'll have another interview about that because that's something.
That is a whole
Yeah.
other thing.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, definitely. And so what I decided to do was to aim for the one that the time period that is most familiar to modern audiences through
Hmm.
the various retellings. And one that was popularized mainly through Sir Walter Scott's work Ivanhoe when he included
Right.
Robin Hood in there. So it took a Scotsman to really set it firmly in the era of Richard the Lionheart and the Third Crusade,
Yes.
in our memory.
And that's late
Um,
the last couple years of the 12th century, I think, right?
right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's basically the 11. Well, so our
80s and
story
90s or
starts
yeah.
in the 80s and 90s, exactly.
Hmm.
Our story starts in the 70s, though.
Right. Right.
Because of, so it's around, and I'm not sure if you've run into the parts that reference Thomas Becket yet. But
Yeah.
he
Hmm.
gets, mhm. And so it's during an era up. It is during an era of upheaval in
Uh-huh.
various different ways because
Yeah.
you're dealing with the legacy of the Norman conquest, which happened 100 years before, but there still are divisions in society because you've got most of the aristocracy are the French-speaking descendants of Normans. It's the
Right.
dominant culture within
And
the
that's a I
aristocracy.
think would talk about how that's a Frankish and Norse kind of mashup, there,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's basically yeah, as you say, a Frankish and Norse I can't talk today, a Frankish and Norse mix.
Yep.
Uh, when the Norsemen were raiding France,
Hmm.
essentially, the king of France cut a deal with them and said, "Hey, we'll give you some land here if you Christianize."
Hmm.
And if just chill out, for heaven's sakes, chill out, you guys. Just,
Oh yeah,
calm
by the way,
down.
there's a big island right over there. You could
Yeah,
just go take that.
exactly.
Leave us
And
alone.
so what they
Thanks a
said
lot,
was, "We will
France.
send
No,
you." Thanks, France, exactly. So they
we
basically
have
said,
viewers in France. I love you all. So no.
"Oh, well, we love you, Frenchies." Anyway, so so the Normans, they Frenchify the French king. He sends
Right.
them French wine and women. He does. He says, "Here's our French wine and here's our
Right.
French ladies, and here, have kids with these French ladies, and then you can sort of be half French, sort of." And and so this is what happened, and they developed their own sort of culture in a way that
Yeah.
is mostly Frenchified, but it also
Right.
has this Norse side too. So
Okay.
it's funny because I'm actually writing book 2 now in this series, and I'm
Sure.
just writing a section where we actually get the character Roger back in Normandy, and he's going around Normandy, and we talk a little bit about how he is trying to deal with his mixed identity, really, because
Hmm.
in some ways he's too English for Normandy now, but in
Right.
other ways he will always be a Norman in England. And when he starts
Yes.
traveling through the rest of France, he's too Norman to be French. They don't
Right.
consider him properly French. He's a half breed. He's and he doesn't
Wow.
talk proper French. He talks Norman
Right.
French with all Norse words
Yeah.
sprangled in there. So he deals with this
Yeah.
reality of being an Anglo-Norman, that he struggles to find a place even in his old like ancestral homeland. And
Wow.
so all of that was just interesting research to do. I have to
Hmm.
say that was to do because I wanted to do. You notice in a lot of Robin Hoods, they they treat the Normans as just the villains, kind of, I wanted to do a little more complexity. I mean, certainly there are Norman villains, but there are also Norman people of every stripe,
There's Saxon
and they have
villains
their
too.
own. Exactly, there are Saxon villains
Yeah.
too, and the thing is that, when you think about it, it's the Saxons are the ones who, conquered and displaced the Celts who
Right.
were there before them, and then you get the Normans doing the same thing to the Saxons. It's just and then of course the Celts did it to the Neolithic tribes. It's just the
Yeah.
succession of peoples. And then the Danes are another whole thing thrown in the mix. They're from
Right.
the Danelaw, and they came over during the whole Alfred the Great era, and so on. So there's all these different mixes of people in this era in England,
Hmm.
and in Wales, obviously, because we mentioned that as well, and throughout the British Isles, but that's our focus is mainly in England, that we see this mixture of people from different ancestries of Norman, Saxon, Dane, and Celt, and
Hmm.
I guess the story is about them trying to find a way forward from their mixed heritage, you might say.
Yeah.
Now they are English. It's about the English identity very
Yeah. Well,
slowly coming into being.
and what really is interesting to me too is this we see I'm just laughing here because I never thought of this connection until just now, but Lewis gets into this a lot in that Hideous Strength, the third book of the Ransom trilogy series. I don't know if you're familiar with those ones, but because it's just a really interesting, in several characters voicing this, because Merlin shows up in that story, and it's starting to get at some of that, and they're having this kind of ongoing back and forth about like he's Britain, you know, like he's like old school, and like, but these aspects of English culture are more of like the Roman holdovers, and
Yeah.
this is Saxon stuff, and this is and it is very complicated, which
It
is
is.
probably why our language is so complicated too, for that
Oh,
matter.
it is. It's a very
We have a very
complicated
bizarre
language.
language, with a lot of different injects, and yeah.
And I mean, I think it does really come down to the fact that, I mean, what we see a little bit also through Robin's mother, her character, she's
Hmm.
very much of Saxon,
A purist.
diehard.
Yeah.
Yes, a purist. Yeah, very much a purist. And she feels like the Normans, they're corrupting everything. They're
Yeah.
corrupting their very language. They're taking away their story. It's
Right.
really affecting her. And and the thing is, though, Alfric, her husband, Robin's dad,
Hmm.
sees it differently. And he sees it that no, even if they are kind of Normanizing us to an extent, we are also Anglicizing them.
Yes.
Um, and it's true. And that's
Which I
the
can't
thing.
wait to see, because you said with Roger that's going to start to
Yeah,
show up, like, because I remember that scene, like when he talks about that, but we haven't seen it yet as much at this point with
right.
and again it's just so this back to this main theme too of like this Catholic imagination. It's I think a lot of people hearing that, let me just ask you this quick, a lot of people hearing that would perhaps think we're saying, Catholic storytelling is, what you guys mean by that is like a lot of these, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but a lot of the evangelical kind of movies where it's
God's
very,
not dead.
it's yeah, it's like, but right, like it's very direct, it's very blunt, it's very in your face, and it's like a church movie or a church
Mhm.
book, and that's not what we're saying here, is it? Or what you're saying about Tolkien earlier, that this is attempting to tell just a good story that aligns with what we believe in faith about the nature of how God has made things. So like you've
Right.
shared, for example, about like things that are important to you personally about pro-life message. Is there anything like that in particular you'd maybe point to as far as like from a sacramental or Catholic imagination behind this story in particular? More
Yeah.
than just like like this happened and this happened, and this is what the church looked like institutionally in England
Yeah.
in 12. You know what I mean? Like some people might not get that distinction.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that a key point is to show characters with a living faith. And
Mm,
that's what I was striving to do, because I think a lot of people confuse what a Catholic culture would look like. You
yeah,
know, first of
it's a
all, it shouldn't be
theocracy.
a
It's
exactly.
I
So
get
so
that a
well,
lot.
there's two extremes in it, really, and like the one is the very secular view of like what the Middle Ages would be like, and it would just be
Right.
like horror experience, and everything is just to the pits. Kind of Game of
Yeah.
Thrones, really, honestly,
Well,
for
and I get the what's that other one? The uh um Handmaid's Tale. I sometimes see people
oh,
throw that out like, oh, they just want it to be Handmaid's Tale. I'm like, okay.
Handmaid's Tale is just stupid even as a premise, because look, if there was like a crisis where there was fertility problems, but you still
Yeah.
had all this technology, what you would do is like figure out who was fertile, right? Which I guess
Yeah.
are doing, obviously. And then what you do is give them loads of incentives to get married and have
Yeah.
like 13 kids apiece. That would be
That's
what you would do.
yep.
What
They've
the
done that.
heck? The other
They're
thing is
trying to
just,
do that in Russia and other places where they have a
yeah,
demographic winter,
I mean,
like
like seriously,
prizes.
it's
Yeah.
like they're doing what the heck? They're doing bondage fantasy. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it is. It is. It's
Yeah.
bondage fantasy. So it's
Yep.
not even good. Like I was reading this awful book. I've read a lot of awful books. That's not
Well, I
the
think you
price
mentioned
of.
that before. Like in your editing world, you have to sometimes.
Yeah, do some things. Yeah.
I don't envy you for that. So.
Yeah, no, and it's just like there's this one. Well, there's been a lot, but this one I just finished like last week, which is different than the one I mentioned. Sort of funny. In the
Mm,
previous interview I was on, the J.R.R. show,
hmm.
I mentioned I had just finished an awful book where the historical female character is doing all this ahistorical stuff.
Hmm.
Well, and now I read a different one with a similar problem, but it's even worse. It's another, it's 18th century, another one, and basically, yeah, it comes off as I was reading it. I'm like, this story barely has a plot. And the more I'm reading
Mm,
it, the more I think it's just a certain fantasy someone has.
yeah.
And yeah, like for example, it was, oh my gosh, and just including like such modern concepts of whatever what their morality, and it's
Yes.
just sort of like, all right, so the
And it
author is
just it
doing.
wasn't there. The
No, no,
categories. It's
no, not even remotely. Like, so for
yeah.
example, even like in the 18th century, yeah, yeah, people did all kinds of immoral stuff, but
Right.
frankly, the culture would know it was immoral. Like that was the
Mm,
difference. They actually were like, yeah, and that is wrong, even though they're
right.
doing that. Um, but this is ridiculous. I'm not going to go into it in great depth. I could go down a long bunny trail here, but essentially, just to give you an idea of how ridiculous this is, they make the moral groundwork of this between like one party guy and another party guy who are all
Hmm.
sleeping around here. Like
Right.
one party guy is the bad guy and one is the better guy because condoms. And I'm like, in the 18th century, like, yes, yes,
Yes.
condoms. Like I
It's
don't think so though. I know that they existed,
the
but
be
it's
all end all. Right.
not
Yeah.
even close to being like that. And it's just ridiculous. It reads like a
Yep.
comedy commercial. Like as you're reading the book, I'm just like, what the heck? Who the heck did
Maybe
the research?
maybe that's what he was going for.
What
Some
possibly
sort
he
of
was?
sponsorship or
Maybe
whoever.
that was that's what I'm thinking. I'm
Well,
like, was he sponsored? I don't know.
well, it's and it brings up because again, like this is so difficult to write good historical fiction because I was even thinking a movie that I used to like that I don't anymore is Kingdom of Heaven came out like 2004 or 5. And it's
Oh,
just like as time went on and I learned more, it just became so obvious that they're putting on the lips of these. It's is that the Second Crusade or third? That's the Second Crusade with
it's
Saladin,
the
I think.
second. It's the second going into the third
Right.
because it's
And
the yeah,
so right. And so they same time period, right, basically as this in a lot of ways, but
yeah.
it's like I think he even meets Richard the Lionheart at the end or something. But he's like, it's this you take a very niche early 20th century framework of socio-political buzz things and put it back in the 1200s and it's just or late 1100s and it's just that's not how it was. Like
No,
that's not how people
it's
like
not.
everybody's a
Yeah,
sinner. Everybody's always been like it's there's good and evil in every generation. We're struggling with the Ten
sure.
Commandments still, but it just didn't look the same way. And
No.
so how do you
Oh my. I mean, I've
do you
talked to
see, I guess what I'm
many.
asking you is do you see these scenes kind of play out? Like do you feel like you I've heard different things from different authors, right? And my own experience in my own little way sometimes
Yeah,
like I'll feel like these characters almost take on a life of their own and I'm kind of capturing it sometimes or sometimes it's a little more orchestrated. I'm just curious how that works for you.
Well, quickly, just on the Kingdom of Heaven note, I've
Hmm.
talked to various friends from the Muslim world, and
Yeah.
they don't like it much either, for the most part. They like it because, okay, one thing we all agree on, the guy they got to play Salahuddin was
Yeah.
perfect for the role, but the stuff they made him say was dumb. So it
Yeah.
was almost like, okay, he looks great. He really embodies it. We
Right.
love it. But what the heck is he saying? Why is he saying this stupid stuff? It
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense. And of course, the Christians fared even worse
Right.
in
It's the whole way
the
through it. It's just, like there's nothing to this. Everybody knows that. It's just, it's like, all right.
it's like no one
Like,
was acting like themselves. No one was acting. And I mean,
right.
the thing is, I could have a lot of appreciation, and I do, for Christian and Muslim, characters in these conflicts who really, did, brave, and chivalrous stuff for their own respective side. But
Hmm.
one thing I don't appreciate is taking these characters and essentially just putting in their mouths like modern concepts
Right.
about society and it's that religion, and it's just like, what the heck have you done to these people? Like,
Yeah.
why? So it's sad, it's unfortunate, and so much of Hollywood is like that. And of course books, as I
Hmm.
was saying. So it's just an unfortunate state of affairs, but interestingly, like, the later books in my series do get into the Crusades proper.
Hmm.
um so, and one character is actually based on a real character who's Salahuddin's aide de camp, one of his aide de camps,
Hmm.
who historically sacrificed his life so the Sultan could escape when a battle was going south. And he was about to be cut off from his troops because
Hmm.
Salahuddin rode out front to try to, keep them together from retreating. And then he got kind of lost in the moment. And so some knights were like, hey, let's go try to capture this guy. That would be very helpful. And so
Hmm.
his aide is like, hey, my sheikh, run for it, or, ride for it. Get out of here. I will sort of fight them off. And well, I'll ride off and try to distract them and
Yeah.
fight them off. We assume this poor guy was doomed. But in my version, he's not so doomed. He gets captured,
Hmm.
and ends up in England as a mercenary, essentially, in order to survive his captor, who himself is sort of a mercenary. So it gets
Yeah.
complicated, and this character, Al Kashif is his moniker. He ends up being set up to by his captor, who's a mercenary, to capture Robin Hood. He's got this mission. He's
Ooh.
to capture Robin Hood. So he
Yeah.
becomes a whole character himself that takes up a lot of time as the story progresses.
That's
But
pretty
doing
cool.
the research, yeah, doing the research for that has been pretty epic journey in and of itself, because with
Yeah.
that you're getting into a whole nother sphere of really trying. And I mean, when I decided to do this, I said, I really want to portray this young Muslim guy correctly to the era. It's so
Yeah.
important to me because I know how I feel when Christians are just portrayed stupidly, and I really, really want to give, Muslim readers a chance to see themselves in a way that's coherent, especially in that
Right.
era. So I went all out to try to research and to try to really get a flavor for the medieval Middle East,
Hmm.
and particularly in his case, the cities of Baghdad and Damascus, which he kind of
Yeah.
commutes between through the story,
Right.
and just working alongside plenty of Muslim cultural advisors. They kind of got
Right.
on board with me, and they really helped me out a lot, to try to get this right. And they even helped me, like, again, ghostwrite kind of, various skeletons of scenes,
Sure.
and help him talk like a Muslim, really, because it was just like, I want him to sound like that. I want him to convincingly sound like that. And so yeah, so that's been quite a journey, and that, has been, it kind of opened up like another dimension of the story too, because now you're talking about like the Christian world with all of the way that the way that Christianity permeates
Hmm.
aspects, like almost every aspect really, of
Right.
the medieval European world. And then on the other hand, you've got Islam that also permeates almost every aspect of the Middle East.
Yeah.
And so that's just been fascinating. And then to see those characters eventually meet and cross over, and it's been quite an adventure doing that kind of research. And so just thinking about, yeah, so in terms of making a Catholic story, or what's particularly Catholic about this book, so for me, what it is, I think, is, yes, showing faithful Christian characters living in a complex world, which is relatable to our own. For me, it's very important to be realistic in the fiction that I tell, but not in the way that realism has been taken nowadays is usually not very realistic, actually. It's just misery.
Mm.
So I'm trying to give a balanced view of the Middle Ages, that it's not a utopia like some rad trads tend to do that, and it's not true
Mm.
either. There were many, many problems in, the Middle Ages in Christendom. But at the same time, you have characters who are truly pious. They're not just going along with it like so many other, versions of events have it, like, oh, they don't really believe it, they're just doing it. No, they believe it. And even people who frankly are not living up to their faith still kind of intuitively believe something.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
They are Catholics, they're just bad Catholics, so to speak. um and so, that was important for me to show these characters and their faith. And with Robin Hood, particularly in the Legendarium, I mean, he's marked out very clearly as being a devout Catholic. Even
Mm-hmm.
as an outlaw, he's a devout Catholic with a deep Marian devotion. And that's something that hasn't been focused very much on. It
Mm.
was downplayed a lot after, England's unfortunate split,
Yeah.
with the church.
Sure.
And so the Catholic elements of Robin Hood were kind of whitewashed in many ways. And they even think that may be why Maid Marian became prominent, because
Oh,
in the earliest versions, they basically said, Robin has no other lady but the Virgin Mary. So there was this
interesting.
sense that, yeah, he was almost a
You
pseudo
keep the
mystical
name but
figure.
change the character in
Right,
a way.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And I tried to do both in mind, that ultimately it
Mm-hmm.
is that, he does have the strong Marian devotion, but Marian does appear as a character. But in a sense, he's drawn to her because of that, reflection in a way that
Right.
he sees Mary in Marian, but he also sees Mary in all women. He has this
Mm-hmm.
chivalric quality. And of course, this was in the original legends too. It was always, he will never harm a woman nor a man in woman's company. And
Mm.
that was his, foundational point, and it tied into his Marian devotion. So all of that was important for me to put in, to emphasize the Catholic elements and just the organic nature of Catholicism in England, particularly because it's so often forgotten just how rich the Catholic heritage of England is, and how organic it was to England. I mean, quite frankly, there was almost like kind of a, such a propaganda job done on
Right.
the English people in terms of making them think that Catholicism was foreign to them. When you read, like, just a little while ago, I was reading the letters of the Duke of Marlborough,
Mm.
and this is a early, late 17th century, early 18th century military commander, very famous, in like the War of Spanish Succession. He was considered to be one of the first early modern, like, mega military commanders of Britain. Anyway, suffice to say, in his letters, you're reading this guy who's sort of like, English as roast beef or whatnot, and he is absolutely convinced it is impossible for an Englishman to be an Englishman and to be Catholic.
Mm.
It's not a thing. And it's like, man, what do you mean? It's like, if you scroll back,
Right.
just scroll enough, you'll run into it. But like, and I'm convinced he was a sincere guy in this, but
Yeah.
he's like dead on convinced. And there's so many people like that. It's like, it is impossible that a king of England should be Catholic, because the people of England, they're like, and it's an antithesis of them being Catholic. And he just was going on about this, and I'm just like, what makes you think that? But so it was just a PR job, essentially, that was,
Yeah.
very successful, unfortunately. But I think for me, as an Anglophile and as a Catholic, it's just something that's always been very important to me, to
Yeah.
try to highlight that, England was very, very Catholic. And
Yeah.
and to do so, it is nice being able to set it in the Middle Ages and to be able to show that naturally.
Yeah.
And throughout the story, I think also I try to deal with, as you said, the pro-life elements are another thing that come through in the story. In Roger's side of things. So
Mm-hmm.
Roger is, for brief
Mm-hmm.
for the audience, Roger is the character who is the most struggled in a sense with his Christianity. He on the one hand he wants to be a good Christian, but he's living through almost an eternal dark night of the soul because his parents are abusive and his upbringing has
Mm-hmm.
basically been terrible, even though they're a very wealthy family, but he's just had no real love in his life
Right.
until his wife
His story
Rosalinda.
is very, very compelling. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that and it's a real tragedy.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's deeply sad, but even he really does, he is a Catholic. I think that's the key
Yeah.
thing about him. He is a Catholic, he is a Christian, even underneath all of this struggled grayness, really, of his character. He is, at the end of the day, still has this seed of the faith within him. And that was important for me to be able to show that even the complex characters have this within them, that the faith can be brought out through adversity, and
Mm.
the fact that, yeah, there, the injustices of the society, you know, really do come down to degradations of human dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what we see in terms of the Lord's abuses over their serfs and their tenants, and the abuses of the Normans over the Saxons and the Welsh, we basically see this inversion of what we show with the Locksley family, in the way that, like, Alfric and Eldreda and Robin view the people who live and work on their estate.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they view each other as a family, really. The fact of the matter is they are living the Christian life in the way that they're conducting themselves, and their lives to every degree, in terms of how they treat each other and those who are working and living on their lands.
Mm.
The Cavendish family, Rogers family, are the opposite of that. It's a massive
Right.
dysfunction.
Right.
And so the abusiveness that spills over among the family itself spills over onto the people on the estate. So it's meant to be kind of a two views, as it were, of someone,
Yeah.
people living out the Christian life and people living it out badly, very badly,
Right.
almost on its head. So, and that comes
And
to
that
the
that
fore.
works. It
Yeah,
worked. I think it works well.
and yes, thank you. And it comes to the fore with the issue. And again, I don't think you've gotten up to that section yet, but we discussed the issue of abortion in the Middle
Mm-hmm.
Ages, and this being used. Abortion was often used to cover up for the crimes of the aristocracy, but also in the prostitution industry, kind of the,
Mm.
career as old as time, but it's always been a situation. But the way that characters react to abortion in it shows their Christian foundation, was that naturally they view it as horrible, and even the people doing it know, it's bad. They're just doing bad things. It's not at
Right.
all. And this is even, I try to go into the story. This is even at a time when you did have these debates within the church about, like, when does the soul enter the body,
Yeah.
but never was that used to justify abortion. So the sort of
Right.
silliness you hear about with people trying to make that a case, it never was that
No.
used as an excuse for abortion. So I try my best when doing this, not just with the abortion issue, but in general, to offer a holistic, I guess you might say, pro-human dignity view of
Yeah.
reality stories I tell, and even choosing, for example, to try to be as tasteful as I can, even when
Right.
dealing with very harsh subject matter. I
Yes.
don't want to, in the process of trying to show different things for what they are, I still don't want to do it in a way that objectifies the characters that are being discussed.
Well, and,
So I
and
think
to
that's
that end, I mean, it's clear just on reading through some of those portions, and I haven't gotten to some of those obviously, but like that it's when more like grown up kind of content comes into it. I think it's very clear, very obvious that you're not, for you, it's not about that itself, or that particular encounter or that particular thing. Like, whereas in a lot of modern stuff, obviously we don't have to get into all that, but just, there does seem to be, like, when someone's approaching it from a more nihilistic, or sort of, false sense of humanism, like sometimes it'll be a glorification of things that we would not glorify. So
yeah,
well done
yeah,
on that, I
and
guess is what I'm saying. Yeah.
yeah, no, yeah, and even, for example, things that they're we would say morally fine, like for example, marital relations
Yeah.
between a couple, it's not, we're not here to sort of voyeuristically stand around their
Right. Yeah.
bedroom, to, like, even though some people did that back in the aristocracy
Yeah.
weirdness in the Middle Ages,
It's
but
always
we're not
weirdness.
going to do that. We're not
Right.
here to do that.
Right.
We're just here to get across character development and just a real part
Yeah.
of life. That's the
Yeah.
way it is. Real part of life, real character development, real things that happen to people.
Right.
But we're not here to be, dare I say, gross. That's not what we're
Right.
here to do. So that's important to me. And by the way, age range, just to give a heads up on like what the age range, I
Yes,
imagine
I should
it's
have asked.
15 plus. Yeah,
Okay.
15 plus. So
Yeah, I
I
think.
imagine mid-teens and up should be
Yeah.
fine with the content of pretty much all my books as
Sure.
well. Because in brief, I will give brief pitch. Currently working on my current, in addition to trying to get the second book off the ground of the
Yeah.
series, I'm also working on my baby, my pet project right now is a series, well, two books, duology, which is a
Hmm.
weird word, and that's why I keep hesitating to use it. But it sounds like a bug with a
I like
strange
it.
religion. But anyway,
I like it.
but yeah, so a duology that's set during the American Revolution, but it basically follows a
Yeah.
young man who is a Catholic recusant. He's come from a Catholic recusant family in the north of England, and it deals with the Catholic recusant experience in
Hmm.
England during the 18th century, which is not covered very much because we usually think about obviously the real bloody persecutions in the 16th and into the 17th century, but then we kind of jump and we get to like Catholic emancipation way later in the 1800s, but we kind of miss the 1700s sphere. So I really wanted to
Hmm.
do that. So I do that, and I cross it over with the American Revolution by having the young man in question, Edmund, who's named after
Hmm.
Edmund the Martyr and St. Edmund Campion. That's
And
why
Campion. Yeah.
it'll be said throughout the story he's named after the two Edmonds.
Okay.
So basically, he ends up through a series of happenstances befriending General John Burgoyne, who's
Mm-hmm.
the British general who was in charge during the Saratoga campaign that was
Saratoga.
the turning point, yep, of the
Hmm.
American Revolution. And he was a part of a northern aristocracy family. So
Hmm.
he knows these people, and Edmund, who's also nicknamed Ned, his dad had lent Burgoyne money at one point. They end up friends. Burgoyne ends up helping them out when his dad dies. So through a series
Mm.
of events, Burgoyne and various other stuff going on ends up persuading Ned to take the Test Act, which you had to take. This was like the Latter Day Oath of Supremacy, which
Hmm.
you had to take in order to become and get an officer in the British military, get a commission. You have to take
Right.
the Test Act. So, Ned resists for a while, but then he caves and he takes it and he ends up on Burgoyne's staff as a young staff officer, a lieutenant. And he winds up in the Saratoga campaign. And things go
Mm.
absolutely to hell in a handbasket for the British on this campaign. Things
Yeah.
it just ends up nightmare fuel.
Yeah.
So all this happens to him, and the sheer horror of the whole thing ends up pulling him back towards his faith. But
Okay.
this creates all kinds of complications, legally and otherwise, for him. And what ends up being the sort of turning point of the story itself is, well, whether he's going to stick with the British and go home to England to
Hmm.
face God knows what, because after having those privileges when you're an Anglican and then um, kind of
Having them taken
revoking them and
away.
ending up in a
Yeah.
sticky legal situation with me and having them taken away, he's bound to face some really difficult stuff going back, or he's presented with the option, which historically was presented to various redcoats in the aftermath of the surrender. You can jump sides and
Hmm.
you can go over to the American Revolutionary side and try to start up a new life in America. And so this becomes his moral quandary, and it
Hmm.
involves all of these layers of loyalty and what is the nature of loyalty to one's country, and when it's becoming
Wow.
difficult to loyalty to one's faith, and what do you do? And so that's going to be Edmund's query. What is he going to do? And I'm not going to give that away because it's
No,
the
I'm so
story.
excited for that because that's my favorite era of American history that I wanted to
Oh,
major in it in
wonderful.
college, but they didn't have a major track in that, so I majored in Civil War history instead. But I wrote my
Oh, that's
thesis
great.
on guys who were trying to pick up, the Francis Marion tradition in the
Swamp
Civil War. So
Fox.
I felt like I
Yeah.
was sort of cheating a little bit by still doing what I wanted. But no, I'm excited for that one. I think especially,
Excellent,
yeah.
wonderful. Well, now I know we can geek about this later on then.
Yes,
Now that we know.
please. Yep.
So
I wanted to ask you, we only have a little bit of time left here, Avellina. There's so much more I want to go into, but I did want to give you a chance here to maybe talk a little bit about Fellowship and Fairydust. I mean, how can you not be interested in something called that, first of all? So why don't you tell us a little bit
yeah.
about how that, what that is and what you guys have going on?
So, A Fellowship in Fairy Dust is a magazine dedicated to inspiring faith and creativity and exploring the arts through a spiritual lens. We take a lot of inspiration from the Inklings, so like J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S.
Hmm.
Lewis, and also others like G.K. Chesterton, George MacDonald, etc.,
Yep.
who basically were all talking about the same thing, which was this concept of the imagination as being a vehicle of grace, sacramental imagination, as Tolkien put it. And that was something that inspired us. We are a merged organization.
Hmm.
Originally, we came together through two different entities. One was Ink and Fairy Dust, which was founded in 2009, and the other one was the Fellowship of the King, formerly called Expressions, which was founded in 2012.
Hmm.
And we merged in 2017. We became Fellowship and Fairy Dust, and basically, we are expanding as we go.
Oh.
We've just now started a print magazine. We used to be
Oh, cool.
solely on, so now we're print. We sell our issues on Amazon, and we have a running blog that's pretty constant. We're always looking for new material. So we take short fiction, continued fiction. We release in parts, poetry, articles and essays, a little bit of everything. We even take fan fiction. So, that's something
Oh,
that
yeah.
I know a lot of places don't take, but we're very open to that. So, bring us your Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Star Trek stuff. We will take it. And yeah, and we also take artwork and photography. So we're very diverse in that.
Yeah. I'm just
In
looking through
20,
some of this right now.
Oh, cool. Yeah, by
Yep.
all means, yeah, do an exploration. In 2019, we also hosted a conference in
Yeah.
Oxford, England. So we did it out of Oxford University at Lady Margaret Hall. And it was a conference about Tolkien and his spiritual legacy. So that was our first conference. And what we're really hoping to do this year, hopefully in September, we can get the funds raised. That's where we need
Hmm.
humans to help us.
Yes.
But
Everybody listening,
is
help out.
everyone listening is another a sequel conference, which we hope to do in Cambridge University this time. And what it will be on is basically Eastern and Western spiritual storytelling traditions. So we're basically covering the East and the West and different storytelling motifs and themes and how they contrast and compare.
Very
So
cool.
we're hoping to get that off the ground this year. Again, we would appreciate any assistance, even small bits of assistance, either through the GoFundMe page linked below or the Patreon page linked below. Both of those are
Cool.
really helpful. And also, most of the funds from my own sales
Hmm.
end up going toward it as well. I've been donating most of it.
Oh,
So, buying my books also are great assistance toward that.
yeah.
So, I also have a poetry book,
Hmm.
which is called Pendragon's Shield, and it also is for sale on Amazon on my page.
Yep.
And it covers a lot of different themes and motifs, a lot of historical, religious, and mythic imagery there.
Yeah.
So I would appreciate sales on that. So that is
Absolutely.
also there.
Well, that's awesome, and yeah, just really encourage everybody to check out all of those links before, below. And I'd love to have you back on, Avellina. We have a lot more to talk about, I feel like.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
thank you so much for having me on. I
Oh,
really
thank
appreciate
you. Yeah, and I definitely hope my channel's not enormous, but it's much bigger than it used to be. So I'm
it. Yeah.
hoping that we can
It's
drive
bigger
some
than mine.
traffic
It's
your
bigger
guys'
than mine.
way. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much again. God bless you. Thank you so
God bless
much.
you too. Thank
Yep.
you.
Well, we could have kept going, I think, for a lot longer than that. It was funny because we had to do it later at night, the interview, and it was funny. There were all sorts of challenges coming up with the scheduling of it, but worked out. And I hated to do it. I told her, I was like, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to get going pretty soon. I said I want to keep going with this, but we're definitely gonna keep in touch with Avellina, follow her work, keep you guys posted as well. Please check out the links below. As I said before, like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And God bless you. Till next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.